He can. And then, for like, they've been mad on her so that he knows I'm done. 20 minutes later, when I feel bad because I hadn't seen you, there was something. Yeah. They'll come back. And they were for you before that. And I'm like, oh, I'm straight with you. Yeah, exactly.
You know what used to work
That'd be really good. So do they go every year with the same organization? They go with the same organization? Yes.
I have to set a timer. Sometimes I'll travel like go year round. You were going to go to your round. Think about that. I will call you.
Our kids' rooms are different. That's cool.
Yeah.
Carly, were you on the news the other night? Were you at the animal shelter at Terre Haute? Was you? I saw it and I'm like, that's hard. And then I was like, hey, Shannon was there. I don't think her hair's that long. She goes, no, I don't think her hair's that long either. But it was a side profile of you. And that's not probably her twin sister. But then when you walk by, her hair is all over. She got long hair. Well, that's what you.
They won't be able to budge.
Yeah.
But I have to just a little bit there. No, hardwood man. That's not great right. No, we had a horrible summer. So what's your best part of the summer? What was the best part?
I don't like a single moment. I guess it's being able to go.
Yeah.
So people would work for
Just start last week.
That's cool.
Yeah.
You started.
So, did it come back though if they get to stay out there? Or
I think they're good.
I got a haircut.
Yeah. They're not. They're not getting out.
I was
heard that
and they have to
none of the hospitals county schools are getting
I've always seen them.
There's some
Very nice. So it's sweet. I was thinking about you.
We had.
So, do you want to start playing guitar again? Are you sure? No. Okay. Well, then let me figure it out. I would get 6 because I'm earning about send the classes called I'll figure out
extra $1,000.
Yeah.
So, somebody told me the other day to take milk. That's what I heard the other day.
Not that he was watching
happened to your pants, man?
My pants? That's how I got them at the store like that. Yeah. Hi. Hey, Karen. It was pretty good.
You liked it?
Yeah, I liked it. It was pretty nice.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you liked it.
How you doing, Bill?
Good. How are you, Ernst?
Good.
Hey,
It was pretty fun. I liked it. Yeah. I like the gym. Yeah. Yeah.
How are you? All right. Welcome to Janky Christian Church. It's good to have you, boy, back. Are you sure that was a good night? Just a couple days. Yeah, that's right. I forgot
Oh yeah, that was me. I heard people like
me or him?
I don't like your pants. What do you think about? How the game go last night? What was the score? 22 to 3. Did you guys play? Were they very good?
They're not fast.
Yeah, they were really good last night.
There's this one guy, I'm like, he got packed there for like, and I hardly got him. I got him like on 140 line, like 4 got him by the feet. Full of Logan the B word.
He did. So does Logan even start on offense?
He's a 3-back.
Yeah, I heard he doesn't, but then I just didn't know. I went to the Derby last night.
I got the touchdown.
Can you guys hear very well with the Derby going on? Like the Derby was loud. I met a person from Japan yesterday.
Like a real
Yeah,
person.
yeah. His name. Here, I'll show you if his internet's gonna work.
Is it a guy?
Yeah, it's a guy. I think the internet works for you. His name is Shintaro Sakaguchi. Like I sat next to him at the derby last night. He's a foreign exchange student.
Oh yeah, I know.
Yeah, like all of his friends would come and hang out.
That is
Yeah, that's him on the right. His English isn't the best, but yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah. But he's only here for half. So he's here until next summer. Yeah, we asked him yesterday. He said he's going to be here next summer.
I just got back from
Oh, really? I had this basketball thing today. It's like a workout, and this person who like a shooting scientist, and his place is really nice. He built his own gym, and it's really nice. Like the floors are so good, like I can almost do. Like I was like almost done. The floors are so nice. Like it's a nice place. But yeah, I had that today. Like 8th grade so far. High school's been alright. Yeah, I mean, I think probably my favorite part. I mean, like I don't have to take a PE until like fourth quarter. I have it third. So all 8th grade. Yeah, and then like every day at lunch, I just don't get lunch and then buy like certain things for like 40 cents. So I'll get like cereals and a bag of chips. It's really nice. And like
the basket got 2 touchdowns. No, 1 touchdown. Yeah, 2 touchdowns. One on a on play, and another one on kickoff. Dang. One swing.
Good evening. Good evening. All right, go ahead and stand and turn and love on each other a bit. Hugs and handshakes and fidget spinners flying through the air.
You doing those reps? I've gotten like 3 compliments here.
Dude, one for me.
Yeah. This
Your
person
bottom
at
half
Walmart.
looks like Elvis Presley.
Thanks. I've gotten 3
No, your
compliments.
bottom half looks like Adam Levine on his board.
Thanks. I've got like 3 compliments in my pants today. 2 from him.
Can't you see Adam Levine singing a song in anything in all white? It's just, it makes sense.
I think he did in the animals video. I think he did.
I never watched it.
I think it was that one.
Video I've seen is Chip. Actually, that's a good one.
Sugar baby.
My foes are many, they rise against me, but I will hold
Yeah.
I will not fear the war, I will not fear the storm, my help is on the way. My help is on the way.
Like it won't even start up.
There it comes.
not your fault. I'll have to tell him again. What we need to do is just start like 5 minutes before trying to open his song. And that way.
Turn and love on each other a little bit more. 'Cause I really want you to sing that first verse.
It goes to sleep.
It goes, yeah.
I do it. It's because I'm way too prepared.
That's the story of our lives.
Yeah.
So anyway, so get the person that you didn't hug. You need to hug them right now. Is it working now? There it is. All right, let's start with our first verse. Get them a hug anyway. That was God's way of saying you didn't hug someone that needed it. So just somebody give somebody a quick hug. All right, here we go. My foes are begging, they rise against me, but I will hold back. I will not fear the Lord. I will not fear the storm. My hope is on you. I've been changed. go back to the way it used to be before your presence came and changed me. God, we pray that you'll show us what it looks like to live as changed people. That the change you produced in us will be a change that works into every corner of our lives. That's not an easy thing for us. So God, we ask you to teach us what that looks like, that you'll empower us to do that. And then even tonight, that you'll speak to us through your word to give us even more of a glimpse of what a life like that looks like. Lord, we love you in Jesus' name. Amen. Go ahead and be seated. All righty. So, first off, I want to read something to you all. This has been sitting on my stand for a couple weeks. But, I don't know, three weeks ago maybe, Lisa Gard, Bob and Lisa's niece was with her. Does any of y'all remember that? I don't know if any of y'all were here. She was really quiet, and she was out of town visiting, and she just came to church with Bob and Lisa. And then afterwards, she handed me this card, and I hadn't put two and two together until she said something. But I don't know, a month and a half ago, something like that, with the missions team, their Facebook page, Lisa put out a request and said that her niece, who was in campus ministry, was kind of at the end of her fiscal year, was coming up short with some of her financial support, and asked if we could help cover that. And we did, and that was her. If I'd have known that, I would have had her said something that night. But of course, she probably knew that. That's why she didn't say anything until afterwards. But nevertheless, but that was her, and it was really neat talking to her. But she gave me this card, and I just want to read it to you guys. It says this: Dear Grace Project Church family, thank you so much for your generous donation to help me continue my work in ministry. I'm so humbled and blessed by your generosity. I have heard my aunt and uncle speak so highly of this church family, and especially of your giving hearts, and I feel blessed and grateful beyond words to be on the receiving end of your generosity and grace. Thank you for extending God's love and care to me. May He bless you greatly. Love, Lindsay Kirk. So anyway, that she and her dad is Mike Kirk, and they live in Casey. Sorry. So anyway, you asked if anything good can come out of Casey. Yes. I'm just kidding. So anyway, yeah, that was me.
I want you to know she lives in Martinsville.
Oh, I didn't see you guys back there. Sorry.
We came in late after the hug.
Well, so you guys need a hug. So someone needs a hug then before they get out of here. So anyway, so yes, so they live in Martinsville. Okay, well, see, there you go. He works in Casey, but established roots.
We're glad to sell you insurance anywhere you are.
Okay, sure would. Yeah. Go for it.
Kaylee's watching, so we should give her a shout out.
Hi, Kaylee. Hey, everybody. There's the camera, so if any of you want to, you can swing over here. But we're just real loud. We're going to say, hi, Kaylee. 1, 2, 3.
Hi, Kaylee.
She is in the promised land of Milligan College in Tennessee. So anyway, that's kind of cool. So she is with us in spirit. So anyway. Alrighty. Well, go ahead and turn in your Bibles to 1 Corinthians 7, 25 through 40 is where we're going to be. 1 Corinthians 7, 25 through 40. And to start out, I want to share a story with you guys. I've probably shared this before. But it illustrates kind of what I think part of what's going on with this text. So I'm going to do it again. So if you've heard this before, my apologies. But a number of years ago, I got into riding my bike. What's up, Sammy? How are you? Anyway, we brought some friends with you. Not to embarrass you guys. Good to see you guys. So anyway, I probably did embarrass you. Sorry. But they came in after the hugging too, so you got to hug them before they leave. And Sammy's not real keen on the hugging, so you need to start with her. But anyway, so I got into bike riding a few years ago. I would ride, like pedal biking. I actually rode a motorcycle for a little bit too, but that was more when I was depressed and stuff like that. But for a while there, I was riding my bike
and I would do it, ride it to and from work when I worked at the church. And sometimes on my days off, I'd ride down the Lincoln Trail or something like that, ride on the trails. I was just kind of having fun, kind of getting into bike riding. And people would see me on the road. They'd drive past, roll down their windows, and I'd hear, I'd hear all the comments and the singing and whatnot. But started getting into it and really enjoying it. And I just had kind of a cheapo mountain bike from Walmart, type deal. But I was telling my brother-in-law this, and at that time, my sister and brother-in-law were living in Winona Lake, Indiana. And he, at that time, was getting into mountain biking as well. And he had, which is kind of what he rolls, if he's going to do something, he's going to go all out. So he had a really nice mountain bike. Now, he would probably justify it by saying, it's not the nicest out there. But it was nice. It was a really nice mountain bike. And he got a pretty nice one for my sister as well, which she rode probably twice. He had that. And so we were talking about it, and he said, some of the best bike trails in the state of Indiana are up here in Winona Lake. I was like, really? I did not know that. He's like, yeah, absolutely. Next time you guys come up, you should ride. So anyway, we scheduled a trip to go up there, and I was all excited about this. So we're gonna go, biking, whatnot. Well, we got up there. It was a Friday, I'm guessing, and we got up there, and by the time we got up there, it was after dark. It was 9 o'clock or something like that, and I don't know if I thought we were going to get up there sooner before live. I had my hopes set on going that day. But we got up there and it was dark. So I'm like, I don't know if we can do this. Well, I said something to him. I was like, man, I wish we had gotten up here sooner so we could have gone tonight. He said, well, my bikes have lights on them. And I'm like, sure, riding through strange trails in northern Indiana, if you have headlights, that's like the same thing as being in daylight, right? So anyway, I was like, hey, check, let's do this, And so anyway, we got the bikes out, and it actually wasn't too bad because he'd been on the trails before. He knew them really well, and so he went ahead of me, and I could see him and see what the trail was doing. Of course, I had my headlamp on my bike, and everything was going fine until we got to one point where he kind of stopped and waited for me to catch up. So I caught up with him, and he said, hey, just want to tell you what's coming next. So you're going to go down, you're going to start going down here. It's just kind of a gentle decline, but you're going to start picking up speed. And then you're going to take not real sharp, but you're going to take a hard right. And then it'll keep going down a little bit. And then there's going to be a jump. It's not a big jump, but it's there. You need to know it's coming. And then, but you should be fine. I told him, I jumped bikes when I was a kid. So he's like, yeah, you'll be good. So anyway, I haven't done it in 20 years, but I'm sure we'll be fine. Kind of the same thing, right? And then the trail will just kind of, after you take the jump, it'll go down, and then you'll kind of go to the left of it. I'm like, okay, that doesn't sound too bad. So anyway, he took off going, and as soon as he got around that bend, I lost sight of him. The trees must have been really thick because it was like he was gone. And I'm like, ooh, okay. So I'll just kind of trust what he said. So I start going down, and I go around the curve, no problem. I come up on the jump, no problem. I take the jump. No problem. I land the jump, no problem. Just, I need to clarify that. But the problem that did happen was that when I took the jump, my lamp, I guess, wasn't tightened down, so it kind of flipped up a little bit. So when I landed, the lamp was pointing that way, and so basically I'm in darkness, when I land, and I can't see anything in front of me. And so all of a sudden, I don't know where I'm going, and you just kind of react in situations like that. And so, when you're on a bike and you're not sure what you should be doing, your reflex is to go for the brakes, right? Now, if your bike is traveling at a high rate of speed and you go for the brakes, does anybody know what happens at that point? No. Yes. Yes. So the brakes worked really well, and the bike slowed down very quickly. Unfortunately, I did not slow down with it, and I just kind of go flying over. I just remember traveling through darkness, and oh my gosh, what is going on here? And I just kind of did these, kind of like a rock skipping, across the ground. And I remember the bike kind of flipping over me and smacking into a tree. And fortunately, it wasn't damaged to. And the other thing I remember is as I'm laying there in pain and blood and all that jazz, and just, my pride damaged, my brother-in-law just standing there laughing his rear end off at me with all the encouragement that he could muster. But that moment when I went for the brakes, and that situation would have turned out fine If the lamp hadn't flipped up, yes. But even if the lamp had stayed down, if I could have just not panicked, I would have probably been okay. But the issue is when you can't see where you're going, that's a scary thing, right? When you don't know what's coming next, that is a tremendously unnerving thing. When the way is clear, when you know what's supposed to be happening, life's good. But when the way becomes fuzzy, when it's unclear, when it's dark, all of a sudden things can get very, very unnerving. And that's in the case when it's on a bike, and that's the case in life. And sometimes, when we're talking about following God, we're talking about being servants of Jesus, allowing Jesus to be Lord of our lives. That is a wonderful thing, and that can even be an easy thing at times. When we know what it is that we're supposed to do, and what it is that we're supposed to do is something we actually want to do, which that's not always the case. Sometimes it's not something we want to do, and that's a whole other sermon. But when it's something we know we're supposed to do, and we're clear on it, and it's something we're excited about, following Jesus is easy and wonderful, and it's just an amazing thing. But what happens when that's not clear? When we're not sure what we're supposed to do? When the way is dark? How do we stay on course when the course is unclear? How do we do that? Now, if you have glanced ahead at this text, or if you're familiar with 1 Corinthians 7, you might be wondering at this point, what does that have to do with this passage? Because the passage we're going to be looking at, actually, is another passage about marriage. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, Paul's answering a ton of questions that he's getting from people in the church about different situations pertaining to marriage. And this is the last one in that. And so, it's kind of like, what does this have to do with that? But here's the thing. This passage that he's going to look at, he's responding to some questions, some issues pertaining to marriage. But that's not really what it's about. It is about that, but it's not. Really what it's about discernment. It's about figuring out the way of God and God's will when you have to choose between two things and neither one is right or wrong. It's really easy. If your kid comes to you and says, okay, Dad, what should I do? Should I go to law school or should I go work for the mafia? Like, that one's really clear. You know how to answer that one, right? And it's like, go work for the mafia, make more money. No, anyway, you know how to answer that one because there's a clear right and there's a clear wrong, right? But what about when your kid comes to you and then they're a sharp kid and they say, Mom, Dad, should I go to law school or should I go to medical school? Or they're graduating with a law degree and they say, I have this opportunity to work for this law firm that I would really love what I'm doing, but I also have an opportunity to work with some social justice organization. Which one should I do? There's no clear right or wrong there. Where is God leading in that? And the frustrating thing is that's not always real clear to us. We're not sure how to respond in those situations. And to be honest, a lot of times we just kind of we just say, just kind of, we give a quick answer and we just kind of go with what feels right, react to the situation. Well, I think this probably seems right in the moment, and you just kind of go for it. And we miss the opportunity to really learn how to discern the will of God in situations like that. We miss the opportunity of learning how to stay on course when the course is unclear. And that's what this passage is about. Because to be true, the specific issue that Paul is dealing with is some questions about marriage. Specifically, it's directed to those who are engaged. Nicole's engaged, by the way. If you guys didn't know that, let's give her a round of applause. Woo! All right. So, I don't know if there's anybody else engaged in here. I don't think so. So really, this sermon only applies to you. So anyway, everybody else can leave. We'll just have a conversation here. But assuming that it's not just about counsel for the engaged, and really, actually, in a very specific situation. So I would actually listen to what Paul says here. But really, if you hear what he's saying, he's not dealing just with the issue of engagement. He's dealing with the issue of how do you discern God's will in situations where that's unclear. How do you do that? And we're going to see that here in the text. So let's take a look at that. It says this in verses 25 through 40. Now about virgins, and specifically we're talking about this kind of unmarried unmarried women, unmarried men that are engaged to each other, betrothed to each other. He says this, now about virgins. I have no command from the Lord, but I give a judgment as one who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. Because of the present crisis, I think that it is good for a man to remain as he is. In other words, not get married. Are you pledged to a woman? Do not seek to be released. Are you free from such a commitment? Do not look for a wife. But if you do marry, you have not sinned, and if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. But those who marry will face many troubles in this life, and I want to spare you this. What I mean, brothers and sisters, is that the time is short. From now on, those who have wives should live as if they do not. Those who mourn as if they did not. Those who are happy as if they were not. Those who buy something as if it were not theirs to keep. Those who use the things of this world as if not engrossed in them. For this world in its present form is passing away. I would like you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs, how he can please the Lord. But a married man is concerned about the affairs of this world, how he can please his wife. And his interests are divided. An unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and spirit. But a married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world, how she can please her husband. I am saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way in undivided devotion to the Lord. If anyone is worried that he might not be acting honorably towards the virgin he is engaged to, and if his passions are too strong and he feels he ought to marry, he should do as he wants. He is not sinning. They should get married. But the man who has settled the matter in his own mind, who is under no compulsion, but has control over his own will, and who has made up his mind not to marry the virgin, this man also does the right thing. So then he who marries the virgin does right, but he who does not marry her does better. And then these last couple verses are actually really summary verses for the whole chapter, the chapter as a whole. A woman is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she is free to marry anyone she wishes, but he must belong to the Lord. In my judgment, she's happier if she stays as she is, and I think I too have the Spirit of God. Okay, so first we really need to understand the context of these verses, to just kind of have a couple of big historical contextual rocks in place to really get what's going on here. And the first thing is this, betrothal. He's talking, they translated engaged there because that's the closest thing that we have to that culture. But they didn't really do engagement like we do engagement. Engagement, happens when, the man asks the woman or the woman asks the man. It can happen and say, hey, you want to get married? One of them says, do you want to? The other one says, yes. Usually there's a ring exchange in there somewhere, and boom, you're engaged. If you want to break that off, all you got to do is kind of like say, hey, we're done. Or you're going to take the ring off and throw it at their face or something like that. And you're done at that point. That's officially it's done, right? In first century, that's not the case. That's not the way it worked. You didn't get engaged like that. Your parents, it was arranged marriage, they betrothed you to each other. And it became an official binding thing that a man and a woman were betrothed to each other. And basically, they were bound at that point. They just were not living together. They were not having sex with each other. They were still living in the household of their parents, but they were officially, legally committed to each other. And to break that off, you would have to officially, legally have that broken off. You would have to officially, legally have a divorce. The example we see in Scripture is what happened to Mary and Joseph, right? They were betrothed to each other. Joseph finds out she's pregnant. He knows it's not him. His first thought isn't, oh, it must be the Holy Spirit. Nobody thinks that right out of the gate. And so he's thinking she's done something she's not supposed to. And so he looks for a way to divorce her quietly. He can't just say, we can get married, woman. He has to officially, legally do that, okay? So the issue that's going on here is Paul all along has been speaking to these questions from this church. And they've been asking questions like, if we're widows, should we get married? If we're married and we don't, and it's not working, should we get divorced? If we're divorced, should we get remarried? And his counsel, kind of across the board, he has exceptions through it all, but his counsel constantly has been, stay as you are, remain as you are. You don't need to change, right? And that's the passage we looked at last week, was all about that God has ordained whatever life situation you're in, that he can use you whatever life situation you are in. And specifically, that was in reference, he was using that big idea to talk about the situation of marriage. But all along, he's been saying, you don't need to change. Well, that's kind of a hard thing when you're talking to a couple that's betrothed, right? Because, I mean, that's like talking to a high school senior and just saying, just stay as you are. You don't need to go through any life changes anytime soon. Look like they're going to graduate. I mean, by definition, they can't just, I mean, I guess you can, but it's not recommended to stay your senior year indefinitely. And you're going to go through a life change. And if you're betrothed, the whole idea is not that you remain like that. You push forward into marriage. And so their question is, what do we do? What do we do? Do we pursue that? Or do we break it off? Or do we just remain in this state of being betrothed, which would be kind of odd? And Paul's responding to that. That's the specific situation he's dealing with. The second thing that we need to have in mind is that all of his counsel is colored by the fact that there's something going on there that is a pretty serious situation. He refers to it as the present crisis or this present distress. We don't know what that is. Some historians think that there was a famine at that time in the world, like there was a grain shortage, and it was documented. So it was pretty serious and pretty severe. So he might be referring to that. He might be referring to the fact that Christians were just persecuted in the first century a lot, and they might be experiencing that. He might be referring to the fact that at that time he thought Jesus was coming back pretty quickly. His thinking changed on that on down the line, but at that point it seems like he thinks Jesus is going to return very quickly. It might be a combination of all those three, but we don't know exactly what he means. But we do know this: whatever it was present and it was distressful, right? It's a crisis. It's causing some serious concern. In other words, life is not normal for them. It's not ordinary life for them. And he can just refer to it, and they know what he's talking about. And so part of his advice and his counsel has that in mind, that should you get married in this kind of situation and climate that we're experiencing right now, is that something you should do? And he's saying this to people that they have already made a commitment to get married to each other. And so anyway, as he's saying that, the benefit for us is if you heard what he was saying to them, he doesn't say one thing is right and the other's wrong. He says, either way you go, you don't sin. Either way you go, you're not wrong. He definitely has a preference, and his preference is that they don't get married because of what's going on. He says that very clearly. But he says, either way you go is not wrong. But he still talks them through this. And what we get to benefit from this, because what we learn from this is how to kind of follow God's course for our lives. How to stay on course when that course is unclear. Because the simple criteria a lot of times is is it legal? Is it sinful? Am I able to? And our thought is if we can, if it's not legal, if it's not sinful, go for it. And what we see in there is that's not necessarily the case. Just because it's legal doesn't mean you should. Just because it's not sinful doesn't mean you should. Just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should. There are some things you need to think through. And Paul lays that out for us. And some of what he says here is confusing. I get that. This passage, I think, is very confusing. But I want to kind of point out what I think are some questions in the back of Paul's brain as he specifically deals with this issue in their lives. Okay? And those questions, I think, form a filter for how he wants them to make this decision. And for us, they can form a filter for how we need to make decisions. When we have something in our life where it's a fork in the road, and neither way is necessarily right or wrong, what do we do at that point? Well, and so here's the filter. And so the first question that I think we see in this is, what is God's purpose for the overall direction of your life? What is God's purpose for the overall direction of your life? Now, that's a huge question. And to be honest, you might not know the answer to that. That's a really hard thing to sort out. But I think what we see here is that we need to be asking that question, and we need to be bringing whatever that decision is before that question. And we see it, I think, that question in verses 29 through 31. And I'm just going to read them real quick. They're very strange verses, but he says this: "What I mean, brothers and sisters, is that the time is short." And now listen to this. "From now on, those who have wives should live as if they do not." Now, that doesn't mean that guys should just go play PlayStation from here on out. Oh, it's college days again. That's not what it means. From now on, those who have wives should live as they do not. Those who mourn as if they did not. Those who are happy as if they were not. Those who buy something as if it were not theirs to keep. Those who use the things of the world as if not engrossed in them. For this world, in its present form, is passing away. And what he's trying to say is that now, because Jesus came and died on the cross and was resurrected from the dead, the world is different now. And because we are his followers, our world is different now. Our lives are different now. We have a clearer picture of what God's purpose, his redemptive purpose for the world is, how he's bringing new life and new creation to the world, how he's busy healing the brokenness of the world, and we have a sense that we're supposed to be a part of that, and that's the larger mission for our lives. And so as you consider this question, for them, the specific question, should we go ahead and get married or not? For us, whatever question it is, the question we need to ask is, how does that fit into God's overall purpose for what he's doing in the world and God's overall purpose for our lives? Because that's a question we need to ask ourselves. That's a question we need to wrestle with. And yeah, we might not have the answer to that. I still don't completely have the answer to that. I feel like I'm a little clearer than I was 20 years ago, but I'm still wrestling with that. But my decisions, when I'm having to make decisions, that question comes into play. What's God doing? What's God about? And what part does he want me to play in that? What role does he, and this decision, does it fit with that or not? Not do I want to do it or not, but does it fit with that or not? Are you guys familiar with Jim Elliot and Elizabeth Elliot? Jim Elliot, there was a movie that came out like 10 years ago called The End of the Spear or something like that. Okay, Jim Elliot was a famous missionary. He and like 4 or 5, 6 other guys, whatever, went as a mission team down to South America to try to reach a tribe that had been unreached. And they go to this tribe, and when they make contact with the tribe, almost instantly, the tribe's going to come out and slaughter them. Just kill them. Just forget. Obviously a travesty. A few years later, the wives of those men feel so burdened for that tribe and wanting to show the grace and love of God, they go back to the same tribe, determined to share the love of Jesus with them. I'm just thinking, those are some tough broads right there. That's all I'm saying. I mean, they are some gutsy ladies, okay? And so they go back, and they are successful. Now, the sermon in this is not women can do, are better at it than men. That's not the sermon in that. That might be true as well. But what happened was, what they found out was when they started to minister to this tribe, and the tribe allowed them to form a connection with them, and they ended up telling them about Jesus, and then the tribe converted to Jesus. What they found out as they got to know them was that the tribe, when they slaughtered the men, what stood out to them was that the men did not fight back. And then when they took over their stuff, they found some weapons in there. I think there was probably some guns, I'm not for shooting people, for shooting animals, some knives, machetes, whatnot. They had some things they could use for weapons, and they didn't fight back. And the tribe had recognized that, and they were like, what is up with these dudes that they did not defend themselves? And so that's why when the women came back, they're like, we got to find out what's up with this. And that was what led to their conversion. It's an amazing story. But Jim Elliot's wife, Elizabeth, just kind of became a legend in her own right. Jennifer and I, we've been married for like 2 or 3 months, we got to hear her speak at the North American Christian Convention. And it was amazing. It was like, she's a legend. But anyway, she wrote a book that we read when we were in college called Passion and Purity. Anybody ever heard of that book? It was like, 20, 25 years ago, you just weren't a Jesus-following couple if you weren't reading this book, especially in the Christian college circles. If you didn't read it, you just had a relationship condemned to hell. So anyway, so we read it, because we wanted to be holy people. And it is an excellent, excellent book. And one of the things that she outlines is the struggle in their relationship, the passion that was in their relationship that they had for each other, and the discipline they had to enact to remain pure. Because one of their struggles was when they fell in love, they knew that if they were to get married, it was to each other. The problem was at that time, Jim specifically felt called to a certain mission organization that because of the nature of the work that they did, you could not be married. It was just kind of that kind of dangerous work. And so by policy of the mission, you could not be married. And that's where, at that time, he knew he was called to be. So it's like, wow, what do you do with that? And so they didn't pursue a marriage relationship at that point. And he went off with that mission, and then some years, I think a few years later, he was released. He felt God leading to a different mission, and it allowed marriage. And so they went ahead and got married. But just the fact that their love for each other, their desire to have a life for each other was subordinated to this larger purpose of what God had for them is huge. And it's a huge example for us, and that's what Paul's getting them to think about. Now, oftentimes it's not something as massive as what they were doing, but still, whatever decision we have, the question is, what's God doing in this world as a whole, and what does he want to do through me in this world, and how does this fit into that? That's the question we need to start with. Okay, so that's the first one. I'll move faster with the others. But here's the second one. What is God's purpose for this new responsibility? And will you be able to fulfill it? What's God's purpose for this new responsibility, and will you be able to fulfill it? He's talking about marriage here. And one of his concerns is, are they going to be, he's talking to these couples, he's saying, are you really going to be able to fulfill the responsibilities of marriage in light of the situation as the way it is? He says, I don't want you to be concerned. I don't want you to be burdened down. But the reality is we're in a presently distressful situation. So you have that tension. And then you're supposed to be living as a Christ follower in the midst of that tough situation. So that's another log on the fire. If you guys get married, that's some more responsibility that comes with it. And the question is, can you do that? And that's a question we have to ask ourselves. I mean, Paul's a realist. And that's what I appreciate about him. He's not saying it's bad if you get married. He's saying, can you fulfill the responsibility of marriage? Because, as he says, your interests are divided at that point. When I did my youth ministry internship, in the evenings, I was staying up late playing video games with kids. On my weekend, I was going to the skate park. I was like, man, this youth ministry thing is awesome. Well, then when I came here as a youth minister, I was married and I had a kid. And all of a sudden, I was like, I can't just go play video games until 2 in the morning. That's not in the cards anymore because I have responsibilities. And which was wonderful. To me, I didn't see that as a deterrent to my youth ministry. In fact, Jennifer has always been just a huge help. She usually is better and smarter than me. But the reality is there were some things that I couldn't do anymore because of my responsibilities. And he's just saying, are you recognizing the situation for what it is? And this thing that you are wondering if you should do, can you really fulfill all that it demands of you? In light of who you're called to be, in light of the current situation. Can you do that? And so he asked them to be honest about that. Third thing. What is God's purpose for this time and season in your life? So you have the overarching question, what's God's purpose in this world and my role in it? And what's God's purpose for this thing that I want to do? But then the third question is, what's God's purpose for me in this specific time and season? Paul in verse 35, he says, I'm saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way in undivided devotion to the Lord. Paul's understanding of their situation, and Paul says, I think, this is what I think, but we'll see later. He doesn't say, do what I think. So, he recognizes he's not the authority on this, but his opinion is that God has a desire for them to live in undivided devotion to them, and that this might be too much for them in this specific season. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, in this season, is this the right thing? Not is it the right or wrong thing ever, but is it the right or wrong thing for me right now? What's God wanting to do in me and through me right now? And is this thing going to be a help to that or a distraction to that? Since we've been married, when we have had 2 vehicles, I have always driven the crappier one. That's just kind of, Jennifer doesn't insist on it. She has said many times, if you want it, and she's very gracious that way, but, I would feel like horrible if I'm driving, the nice one and I'm making her drive the rundown stuff. So anyway, so there's always the trickle-down effect, So right now, I graduated from the 2002 Mitsubishi Lancer that I have to disconnect the battery every time you stop and reconnect it every time you start it, to the 2004 Honda Pilot that sounds like it's going to rip apart at the seams every time you take a turn. So anyway, so that's what I'm driving now. But my family knows I would love to one day either have, and I know you think you need to set your sights higher, but nevertheless, I would love to either have a Honda CR-V or a Honda Civic. The new Civics are really sporty looking. They're pretty nice. So anyway, I know, set my sights higher, but you know, hey, I really like Hondas. So anyway, but I thought the CR-V would be nice because it's all-wheel drive, and so when it snows, I don't have to like leave my wife with a death trap as I drive on the interstate. You know, I can have something that can handle the snow a little better. But just to have something new would be so wonderful. Well, a couple months ago, Jennifer had to leave the pilot, our new pilot, with the dealer for a day while they needed to do something. And so she comes home driving like a brand new Honda CR-V, you know, just for a day. I think they make up this stuff just so they can tempt you with new vehicles, you know. So she comes home driving the thing, and she's like, "Hey, you want to go take a spin in the CR-V?" And instantly, where my brain instantly went was, I'm not setting foot in that darn vehicle. Because here's what I know, and I know this already. I'm going to think it's amazing. And I'm going to start trying to figure out how I can get one of these. And here's the third thing. I know I can't. I already know all these things, so why do I need to get in the vehicle and torture myself? And so I didn't. I didn't do it. I'm just like, I'm not, because it would have been a distraction to me. Is it bad to buy a Honda CR-V? No. For me right now, yeah. That's not what needs to be happening in my life right now. And so whatever your decision is, whatever you're wrestling with, the question is, what is God's intention for you right now? His purpose for your life right now. Fourth thing, what is right and proper, particularly as it pertains to the other people that are affected by your decision? And that's one of the things he's wrestling with, particularly in verse 36. As he's talking about, you know, if you're betrothed to someone, you know, gals, if you're betrothed to a guy, guys, if you're betrothed to a gal, and you think you are doing her a disservice by not continuing with that, then go ahead and get married. That's not a problem. You know, in other words, your decision, whatever it is, it's going to affect other people. And you have to discern what is right and proper, not just for you, but for them. When I was, the last few years of me being a youth minister at First Christian, I was just in angst, just for a lot of that time, because, I mean, there were a lot of things going on, but one of them was just knowing in my heart that while I love being with youth and ministering with youth, that my ministry role needed to change, and not sure what that looked like. And as we talked about, should we look at other churches and doing other roles in other churches, that was a really hard thing for me, partly because I love the church I was in, partly because I love this community. But the big thing I kept thinking in my mind was, we have a good thing here with my family. My family has a good thing here. My kids have a good thing here. We have family here. We have people that are close like family. That takes years to develop. And I can't mess this up. I can't just go charging after something and it be the wrong thing, because they're the ones that are going to get hurt in the process. Because whatever I do, I'll probably love it and I'll be enjoying it, but they're the ones that got to figure out if they're fitting in at a new school and making new friends. And you know, that's something I can't just willy-nilly do, because they're the ones that are going to be affected by that. And that's not to say that sometimes you don't do that, but it's not just a decision that I get to make for what's best for me or what's best for Jennifer and me. It's how it's going to impact the people in your life, what's right and proper for them. So that's the fourth thing. And here's the fifth thing that I just think is so huge. What does your conscience say? So five things here, and then I'll comment on the fifth one. It says, what's God doing in the world? What's God's purpose for the world and your role in the world? What's God's purpose for this thing that you're wanting to do? And does it fit within your life? What's God's purpose for you right now? What is right and proper as it pertains to the other people in your life affected by this decision? But the last thing, when you think of all those things and pray for all those things, what does your conscience say? Listen to what Paul says in verse 37. I'm going to read it slowly, and just listen to it. But the man who has settled the matter in his own mind, who is under no compulsion, but has control over his own will, and who has made up his mind not to marry the virgin, this man also does the right thing. He basically says the same thing 4 different ways. That if you have come to the place where you are settled in your own mind and you're not being pressed by other people to do what they think you should do, Paul included, you know, he's told them, I think this is what I think, but he's saying you got to sort it out in your own mind. You can't be listening. You can't do just what I think you should do. You can't do what the other people in your church that maybe pressure you because of their own funky ideas about marriage. You can't do what they say and fit into their mold. You've got to figure out who God is calling you to be and what He's calling you to be. And when that is settled, then make a decision based on that. I posted one of these in the on our Facebook page this week. But Doug Littlejohn has started writing a blog in the last couple months, and I'm not just blowing smoke up your dress right now. It is phenomenal. It is amazing. You guys need to read them. Every time I read one, I'm like almost crying by the time either laughing or crying. It's one or the other. And he is an amazing writer. I know it's hard to believe. You guys, can anything good come from a guy with no hair? And I know you're wondering that. And I'm telling you, it's the truth. I mean, he is a phenomenal writer and just has a way of really getting at what's going on inside of you. Well, he wrote one called Shoes, and I was just reading it this week. And I won't say all that's in it because it would be spoiling it. But one of the things he says when he gets to the end of it is the relief that comes when you start to walk in the person that God has made you to be. He says it a lot better than what I'm saying, but as you walk in the person that God's made you to be, rather than walking in someone else's shoes that they have tried to push you into. And that's basically what Paul's talking about. Be who God has made you to be, not what everyone else is trying to pressure you to be. But you got to sort that out in your own brain, in your own thoughts. Which means he's assuming that your conscience becomes a trustworthy mouthpiece for the Spirit of God to speak. Which to me means that if it's really a trustworthy mouthpiece for the Spirit of God to speak, that you have immersed yourself in God's presence, you've immersed yourself in God's Word, in prayer, you're asking these difficult questions, you're listening to Him, you're giving Him time to speak, you're not pushing Him for this quick, immediate decision, you're not saying, God, I want to know what to do, so I'm going to flip a coin, and since you control the coin toss, if it's heads, it's this, and it's tails, that you're submitting yourself to God. And if you do all that, then I believe God's going to lead you one direction or the other. And there'll be a place where you'll come to a sense of peace. And that your conscience will become a reliable voice for the Spirit of God's work. But you have to have that kind of relationship. Notice what's not in this criteria, these 5 things. It's not your own personal wants or desires. Now, that's in there. That's actually in there. And he says you need to listen to that as well. If you have a desire to be married, if your passions are running strong, and that's fine. If you pursue it, that's fine. So that's not necessarily what your wants and desires. It's not that you don't listen to those, but usually that's all we listen to. And what he's saying, you need to subordinate that under these larger questions as you listen to the voice of God for what He wants you to do. So what does God want to say to you and me through this passage? We start with this question: how do we stay on course when the course is unclear? What do we do when we have to choose between 2 jobs? Or when we want to get married and are not sure if it's the right time? When we have to choose whether we're going to invest our time and energy in a certain ministry endeavor, or whether God's calling us to spend more time with our family. Or whether we're called to remain in the job that God has given us, or whether we go back to school. Those are hard questions, and it's not always clear. And so what do we do when those times come up? What does God want us? How do we process that? And here in this passage, I think Paul gives us some questions that we can ask of ourselves. But even more than questions, I think we give this wonderful example from Paul. That for Paul, Jesus is Lord of every aspect of his life. Not just the things we want him to be Lord of. That Jesus has something to say. So all those decisions that we think are our decisions to make, that he says, no, God has something to say about that, if you'll allow him to be Lord of those decisions as well. But you got to let him work. And the challenge of that is, it means that we come into a place where a relationship with God that's a little slower. It's a little more patient. God is not the genie in the bottle that pops out and just gives us what we want when we want it. But he instead is this, that he becomes our long and patient conversation and life partner that helps us figure out what we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to live. And I firmly believe, and I think the challenge of this is for us to learn to trust that if we will seek God in that way, that we can trust that He's going to meet us in that way, that He's going to speak to us, and that we can trust Him to not keep that way hidden from us, when the time to make that decision really comes. That he's gonna, we might not feel rock solid about it, but he's not gonna just kind of let us walk off the edge of a cliff and laugh about it. He's not gonna let us hit the brakes and go crashing into the trees and stand there cracking up at us. That's not the way he works. That he wants us to be the people that he's calling us to be, and if we will seek him on that, he'll speak to us. That's the challenge of this passage. That's the type of people he's challenging us to be. And the question is, will we do that? Will we submit every corner of our life to him? Will we trust him to, when the course is unclear, that he'll show us how to stay on course? Will we trust him for that? I think that's the challenge of this passage, for us to become people that trust him in that way. Let's pray. God, I thank you for your grace. I thank you that when it comes to life, that you don't leave us to figure it out on our own, that you do want to show us how we're supposed to live, the decisions we're supposed to make, but you also want us to go through the growing pains of figuring that out in your presence, learning to think your thoughts, learning to go through that process of decision making in your presence. So God, I thank you that that's not always an easy thing, that you want us to labor alongside of you. God, help us to do that. Help us not settle for short, quick, easy answers just because those make us more comfortable. And help us to pursue the long discipline of listening to you and allowing you to guide our steps. And subordinating even the smallest decisions to you and trusting that you're going to show us who we're supposed to be. God, help us to develop a kind of relationship with you that enables us to do that. Help us to not settle for just you being a list of rules and regulations. Help us to pursue that kind of relationship with you so we can hear you when you speak to us. Lord, we love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Go ahead and stand.
Greatest love that anyone could ever know. Though it came to cross and grave to find my soul. If I see you face to face, grace amazing takes me home. Trust in you. With all I am, I've been to see your kingdom come. In my heart, I pray that your will be done. Till I see you face to face, grace amazing takes me home. Trust in you. child in all of you. And I will live to love you. I will live to bring you praise. I will live a child in all of you. Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, today. Take my moments and my days, let them flow in Jesus' praise. Take my hands and let them move at the impulse of your love. Take my feet and let them be swift and beautiful for thee. Take my voice and let me sing, always only for thee. Take my lips and let them be filled with messages of thee. Take my silver and my gold, not in mine will I withhold. Take my intellect and use every power now. Even all of me. Take my will and make it thine. It shall be no longer mine. Take my heart, it is thine own. It shall be thy royal. Take my love, my Lord, I pour at your feet with precious store. Take myself and I will be ever only all with thee. Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. Go ahead and be seated. And we're going to prepare for a time of communion. The ultimate example of one who gave his whole life
for God's purposes, of course, Christ. And we remember that what he did on the cross for us when we celebrate communion. So we're just going to spend a few moments in prayer. Just spend some time connecting with your Father. Allow him to speak to you maybe about that thing in your life, whatever that thing is that you're wrestling with. And allow him to speak about that and think through maybe some things we talked about. But then somewhere in the course of that, allow the example of the crucified Messiah to come into your thoughts and allow him with his nail-scarred hands and nail-scarred feet speak to your situation. Maybe things will become clear. Maybe they won't. But allow communing with Christ during this time. Speak to those situations in your life. And then after a few moments, I'll pray. And then if you're sitting in your communion tray, just grab it and start to send it around near where you are. And we'll commune with the Father that way. But let's spend a few moments praying. Jesus, we thank you for your love for us, and what you did on our behalf. But even more than that, Jesus, we thank you for your example of subordinating every corner of your life to the will of the Father. Help us to know what that looks like. Help us to experience that in our own lives. Jesus, we thank you for your example on the cross. That not only made the world different and consequently our lives different, but just provided this example of who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to live. So we thank you for the cross. We thank you for what it means for us. And we thank you that we can take this time to remember that and allow your crucifixion to speak to us again, to challenge us, to offer forgiveness to us for the ways that we fail you daily, to remind us that the world is different and that you invite us into that new world. So God, we thank you. Jesus, we thank you for the cross. We thank you for your love for us on that. And we remember that now. In Jesus' name, amen. So if you're near a tray, go ahead and grab it. Take the bread as the body of Christ broken for you, and the juice as the blood of Christ shed for you. Just take it as you feel led. And then we'll just sing part of one more song and go ahead and commune with the Father. if you're still communing with the Father, you can continue to pray. But if not, go ahead and stand. We'll just sing one more song. Aaron, we're going to start with the second verse, okay?
Okay.
Creator God, you gave me so I could pray your great and matchless name. All my days, so that I more like thee, a blazing offering. My life that shouts and sings the greatness of the King. Glory to God, glory to God, glory to God, forever. Glory to God, glory to God, glory to God, forever. Let it be. Take my life and let it be all for you and for your glory. Take my life and let it be, Lord. Take my life and let it be all for you and for your glory. Take my life and let it be, Lord. Glory to God, glory to God, glory to God, forever. Glory to God, glory to God, glory to God, forever. And I pray that you'll use us this week for your purposes, and that you'll help us to give you the room in our lives to do that. Help us do that this week. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen. I think there's some snacks back there, and Hug next to Hug. Hang on as long as you want. Have a great week.
Did a great job, Aaron.
Thank you. You know, it always seems to crash when we start the service, and then like come off on the first song every time.
You didn't play it seamless, did you?
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah. I went to that shooting scientist guy today. It was pretty cool. Yeah, that kid. We did like a workout kind of thing, so it was like dribbling in the beginning and then like shooting stuff. Yeah, it was me. We had like a group, so it was like me, Jaden, Rob, and then this kid named Aaron, and this kid named Tyler or something. They're from Sullivan. But it was pretty cool. And Maya and Madison Richmond came in right after we left. Yeah, that was fun. So yeah.